Okay. So have you heard about this Polymarket thing? It's this whole platform for betting on the future. Yeah, betting on the future, like will this movie win an Oscar or, who's going to win an election? Crazy stuff. And what's got me really fascinated, I was digging into this paper by Joseph Raczynski, he's a technologist, and it's all about Polymarket and this whole concept of predictive markets.
Yeah, it's really interesting when you start to think about the implications.
Yeah.
Like, are we really able to predict the future? And if so, how does that change how we act in the present?
Exactly. I mean, it's kind of blowing my mind a little bit. Like, on one hand, I'm like, yeah, this is the future, people betting on everything and anything. But then there's this skeptical part of me that's like, come on, can we really predict the future?
Right, and that's healthy. Because it's not as simple as just, throwing darts at a board and seeing what sticks. It's way more complex than that.
Okay, so walk me through it. What exactly are predictive markets and how do they actually work?
Basically, a predictive market, it's like a stock market, but instead of companies, you're buying and selling shares in potential outcomes of future events. Like,
Yeah.
let's say there's a market on whether a certain new technology, like, let's say, flying cars, will become commercially available by a certain date.
Okay, so I'd buy shares if I thought it would happen and sell them if I didn't, right?
Exactly. And as more people buy shares, the price goes up, indicating a stronger collective belief that flying cars are going to be zipping around soon.
So it's like the wisdom of the crowd determining the odds, right?
Sorry. Exactly. And what makes it even more fascinating is that Polymarket uses blockchain technology to make everything transparent and secure.
Blockchain, huh? Okay, I gotta admit, that always sounds a bit intimidating. Can you break that down for me? Like, how does it all actually work?
Sure, so think of blockchain like uh, a giant digital ledger that's constantly being updated and verified by a network of computers around the world. So every time you buy or sell shares on Polymarket, that transaction is recorded on this ledger, making it virtually tamper-proof.
So, no shady dealings going on behind the scenes, like someone manipulating the market.
Exactly. It's all out in the open, which is what makes it so revolutionary.
Okay, I'm starting to see why this is so groundbreaking, but like, how accurate are these predictions really? I mean, can we really trust the wisdom of the crowd to predict the future?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Literally, maybe.
Right. But, there have been some surprisingly accurate predictions made on Polymarket.
Oh, yeah. Like what?
Well, Raczynski talks about how during the last U.S. presidential election, people were glued to Polymarket, watching the predictions unfold in real time alongside the traditional polls.
Really? And what happened? Did it actually predict the outcome?
Well, it wasn't perfect, but it was pretty darn close. In some cases, even more accurate than those traditional polls.
Wow. Okay, so maybe there's something to this whole predictive market thing after all.
Right. And it's not just about, getting predictions right. It's about understanding how collective sentiment and beliefs can actually shape outcomes in the real world and how we can maybe get ahead of the curve a bit.
It's like holding up a mirror to society and seeing what we collectively believe might happen. That's kind of powerful.
Yeah, definitely powerful. But it's not without its potential downsides. And of course, we need to be mindful of those too.
Oh, absolutely. There are definitely some big questions to unpack there. So let's dive into those downsides a bit. What are some of the potential pitfalls of this whole predictive market thing?
Well, one of the big ones that Raczynski highlights is the risk of manipulation.
Manipulation. You mean like someone with a lot of money could come in and try to sway the market in their favor?
Exactly. Even though it's built on blockchain and it's supposed to be transparent and all, there's still a risk that someone could try to game the system.
Okay, so it's not completely foolproof. What else?
Another challenge is regulation, or really the lack thereof. The whole predictive market thing, it's kind of like this new frontier, and governments are still trying to figure out how to regulate it. Is it gambling? Is it investing? It's a bit of a gray area right now.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, if people are betting real money on these predictions, there definitely needs to be some kind of oversight.
Absolutely. And then there's the whole issue of user education. Like we were saying, blockchain can be a bit of a head scratcher for a lot of people. If you don't really understand how it works, you might be hesitant to jump in and participate, which could limit the effectiveness of the whole system.
It's like you need a certain level of tech savviness to even get started,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, and that could create a barrier to entry for a lot of people. But, even with those challenges, Raczynski is still pretty optimistic about the potential of predictive markets.
Really? I mean, it sounds like there's a lot that could go wrong.
There is, but he argues that the potential benefits outweigh the risks. He sees it as like a powerful tool that we can use to understand the world better, to make more informed decisions, and maybe even to create a better future.
Okay, so it's like, yeah, there are these challenges we need to address, but we shouldn't throw the baby out with the bathwater, right?
Exactly. It's about finding that balance, mitigating the risks while still embracing the potential. And he gives some really cool examples of how this technology is already being used in different fields.
Yeah, yeah, like wait.
Well, one area he talks about is scientific research. Imagine if scientists could use a platform like Polymarket to like predict which research avenues are most promising.
Interesting. So instead of just relying on like grant committees or whatever, you're tapping into the collective wisdom of the scientific community to decide where to focus resources.
Exactly. It could potentially lead to breakthroughs happening faster, more efficiently. And it's not just science. He also talks about how it could be applied to things like predicting financial markets.
Ooh, now that's interesting. Could it have like helped us avoid the last financial crisis, you think?
That's a big question, and I don't think anyone has the answer to that for sure. But it definitely raises some interesting possibilities, right?
It does. And what about using it for like social good? Could we use predictive markets to tackle things like climate change or poverty?
Absolutely. He actually dedicates a whole section of the paper to exploring how platforms like Polymarket could be used to address global challenges.
Wow, okay, now we're talking. That's using the power of prediction for some serious good.
It is. And it really highlights how this technology could have a profound impact on, like, literally every aspect of our lives.
It's kind of mind-blowing when you think about it that way. Like, we're not just talking about predicting the outcome of an election or a football game here. We're talking about predicting the future of humanity.
Exactly. And that's what makes this whole conversation so important.
I mean, predicting the future of humanity, that's a pretty big deal, right? Where do we even begin to grapple with those kinds of questions?
Well, that's what Raczynski is trying to do with this paper, to get us thinking about the ethical implications of this technology. Because it's not just about whether we can predict the future, it's about what we do with that information and how we make sure it's used for good.
Right, because like any powerful tool, it could be used for good or for bad. So, what are some of the ethical considerations we need to be thinking about?
Well, one big one is bias. Like any algorithm, predictive markets can be susceptible to bias based on the data that's fed into them. So we need to make sure that the data is representative, that it's not skewed in a way that could perpetuate existing inequalities.
That makes sense, because if the data is flawed, the predictions will be flawed too.
Exactly. And then there's the whole issue of privacy. Predictive markets rely on vast amounts of data, and we need to be very careful about how that data is collected, stored, and used. We don't want to end up in a situation where people's personal information is being exploited or misused.
Definitely not. It's a fine line to walk, right? We want to unlock the potential of this technology, but we also need to make sure we're not sacrificing our values in the process.
Absolutely. And that's why it's so important to have these conversations to involve ethicists, policymakers, technologists, everyone really, in shaping the future of predictive markets.
So it's not just a tech issue, it's a societal issue.
Exactly. It's about how we want to live in the world, what kind of future we want to create,
Hmm.
and that's a conversation that we all need to be a part of.
Well said. I think that's a great note to end on. This whole deep dive into polymarket and predictive markets has been honestly kind of mind-blowing. It's clear that we're just at the tip of the iceberg here, and there's so much more to explore.
Absolutely. And it's an exciting time to be paying attention to this space because it's evolving so rapidly. Who knows what the future holds, but one thing's for sure, predictive markets are going to be a big part of it.
For sure. Well, on that note, we'll leave it there for today. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive, and be sure to check back next time as we continue to explore the frontiers of knowledge and delve into the topics that matter.